I first went to live and work in China 29 years ago. During the academic year 1980-1981, I became a professor at a Chinese university as part of the program of reform and opening up, where the Chinese government was looking for foreign professors to help reinforce their teaching staff. And so to a certain extent, I can say that I'm one of the teachers who trained some of the post-reform generation.
That's right.
And so Professor Wang represents a generation of young Chinese intellectuals who have been trained in their own tradition, both traditional and modern, and have also learned the social sciences from a Western point of view. And for too long, we in the West have been trying to analyze what's happening in China according to the way we think the world works or the way the world should work. But now we have a new generation, this post-reform generation in China, like Professor Wang Jingshu, who can analyze us from a Chinese point of view.
So today, because China is getting so important, so influential in the world picture, really from outside China, we're asking a very central question: is will China politically become a democratic country? One major issue is the relationship between economic development and political change. Whether the growing economy will bring political change. In this regard, in the Western society, there are basically two competing theories or hypotheses. On the one hand, people think because the economy is going so well, the people actually support the current system, support the region. The other argument is the economic development with modernization, with the change in society, people's attitudes change. People will become more like our Western people. Our Chinese people's understanding of rights, of freedom, of liberty will develop. So they will come to demand change in the government. So how do we know which theory is more correct? Really, what have changed in China in the 30 years? One is really the economic transition, and with the social transition. And we're talking about two things. One is the change of system from a planned economy, from the Soviet model to a market economy. That's the change of the growth mode. And the second, what happened at the same time is the growth itself. So it's two things are happening at the same time. In terms of transition, we all know, 1978, Deng Xiaoping was the leader at that time. He introduced this reform policy. So today, when we talk about China's reform, we say 78 was the watershed. Before that was Maoist China. After that was Dengist China. But actually, from 78 to today, you can see two periods of transition. The first, mostly in the 1980s, were more gradualist, incremental reform. At that time, the government didn't reduce the state's economy, but rather let the private economy grow, let the township and village enterprises grow. And that process was basically stopped by the 1989 Tiananmen incident. After Tiananmen, there was 3-4 years of stagnation, and in 1993, a second round of reform started, and this time it was much more radical. Some of you will know the name of the economic reform at that time, Zhu Rongji. He was at the time first vice premier, then premier for 5 years. So from 1993 to 2002, it was Zhu Rongji who managed the radical reforms. Many state firms were closed, were sold, were privatized. Financial system was overhauled. So that was second decade, of reform was more radical, more drastic. But China has a large trade balance, trade surplus. But if you look at regional difference, China run a surplus against EU and North America, very large surplus. But China actually run deficit against other countries, other regions. It run a large deficit against Asian countries, Japan, Korea, also China's Taiwan region. It also run deficit against Middle East and Africa. What happened is China import resources from, say, from Middle East, from Africa, from South Central America, and also import half-made goods, components from Korea, from Japan, and then everything is produced, manufactured in China, and then export to the EU and North America. So what I have been talking about are quite well known to many of you. In this process of economic reform and economic growth, there are also some very negative consequences. One is with economic growth, you have increase in inequality. Social inequality in China worsened in the last 10 years. In the 1980s, the first period of reform, which started in the countryside, so the farmers, the rural residents' income actually rose faster. But after 1990s, rural income stagnates and urban income rise. So you have an increased inequality between rural and urban. But at the same time, you also have rising urban poverty. So that's the issue of social inequality. I'm going to show you some photos. But at the same time, very fast industrialization results in environmental degradation, a lot of pollution. Post-1980 generation, 45 of them can complete senior high school, and 20% of them can now go to college. If you put these two together, it means if you finish high school in China, you have a 60% chance of going to college. And that's more or less equal to the American level, as far as I know. So 2/3 of high school graduates can go to college. In terms of using internet, the post-80 generation, about 25% use email almost every day. Another 25% of them use email several times a week, comparing to the older generation. Even today, many of them still haven't touched the internet. Another way, the Chinese government always say we should develop economy first. We'll have democracy later. So here we ask the people to choose between economic growth and giving people more say in their jobs and community, which one is more important? And the older people, they will think economy is more important. The younger people, they will think economy is less important because they have been in economic growth for so many years. They actually don't care. They think economy in China is going well anyway. We don't need to worry about it. But they worry more about people should have more right of expression. People should give more space to express their opinions.